Welcome to Cycling Demystified, brought to you by Foundation Bike Fit and Frequency Cycle Works, the podcast where we help you take your cycling to the next level by sharing the knowledge from experienced bike fitters, mechanics, and the hidden players within the bike industry.
Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. And today we've got me, Wei, and we've got
Grumpy old Matt.
and
Slightly less grumpy, slightly younger Matt.
all right, welcome back, Matt and Matt.
A brace of Matts.
All right, but well worked, Matts, because you've just finished a bike fit, and I thought it would be interesting just to get some of your perspectives on a bike fit, some of the things that you found out, some of the things that you were expecting, some of the things you weren't expecting. And I think it'll be interesting just to get a perspective, both from someone who's had a bike fit, someone who's doing the bike fit, but also, young Matt, you are someone who is interested in bike fitting. You've been shadowing us, you've been here in the studio, looking at what we do, but now on the receiving end of a bike fit. So it would be really cool just to get your perspective on how it feels to have a bike fit and what your experiences were, and also what came out of it. Was it kind of what you expected? Was it not what you expected? And what's going to happen next? As we all know, bike fitting is just the start of a process. So, yeah, let's get into it. And also, old Matt, you can give your insights.
I'll chime in.
Yeah.
I think it's probably worth starting with, if you set the scene, Matt, as to why you wanted to revisit your bike position, what you like to do with your bike, what any pains, discomforts that you're having, and just kind of like go through for listeners just about what we discussed before we got into it, and just sort of give it a bit of context, set the scene a bit, and then we can get into it.
Yeah.
Sure.
Because this isn't your first bike fit, is it? So.
It's not my first bike fit.
Not my first time at the rodeo.
No, but so I mean, I think I ride relatively similar to your average club rider.
You are in a club.
I am in a club, so I guess I am a club rider.
By definition.
Yeah. So that would usually consist of maybe a longer, more social ride on the weekends, and I wouldn't say I do any structured training necessarily on the bike, but mixing it up with some shorter sessions during the week, maybe, when I have the time. And in terms of the issues I was facing, I think numb toes has been definitely a thing that I've persistently had, which fits haven't really solved for me.
Solved, shed light on, somewhere in between?
Yeah, I think I've maybe thought I've left with an understanding of how to solve numb toes, but actually maybe that's just been more generic advice as opposed to really getting into the nuts and bolts of it. And there's never really been that much experimentation, even though I've sort of persistently struggled with it.
As in experimentation from your part, like trying different things?
No, okay, so I've done a lot of my own experimentation.
Right, okay.
But definitely in previous bike fits, not a great deal. I mean, I appreciate, obviously, it's like we've been saying today, it does require an element of testing, especially things like that, which usually manifest in the worst way after quite a few hours of riding, which you can't do in a bike fit session.
Yeah.
But it's been interesting to sort of understand more about the possible causes for it, and just to try some of those things out and look more in depth at the shoes and things like that.
Yeah.
So that was kind of your main concern, wasn't it? It was that lateral pressure on each foot resulting in numbness in your feet.
Yeah,
basically.
Specifically toes.
Yeah.
And I mean, mainly it's been big toes, but playing around with cleat position has sort of shifted the problem, but never really gotten rid of it.
Yeah. And was there any other kind of concerns that we had before we got into the fit, other than the feet, or
that I had?
yeah,
Yeah. I think upper back and neck sort of thing. General bit of stiffness and discomfort there.
So it sounds like, pain.
Yeah.
Pain kind of drove you to kind of get a bike fit.
Yeah, pain and discomfort.
Yeah.
Because I think numb toes is slightly different from pain, isn't it? It's
Yeah, it's a symptom.
Yeah.
It's just one way that your body tells you that it's not really happy.
Yeah.
But was that the initial reason why you had a bike fit in the very first place? Like, not necessarily with us, but with other bike fitters and so on.
No, actually, initially, I mean, I think probably a lot of people go through this when you first get a bike and you're just sort of completely stabbing in the dark as to where your saddle should be. And yeah, in my first bike fit, there was some pretty significant changes made to my saddle height, and I obviously just hadn't realised it was way too low. And I think at the start that definitely showed up in my lower back. I never really had knee problems, but definitely lower back, just really putting a lot of strain through my lower back from just having an absurdly low saddle.
Yeah.
And just not even really thinking about it.
Yeah. So you made some good changes, and that got you into more of that club riding, so you could do more,
Yeah.
you could be more comfortable, go ride faster, ride further.
Yeah, I think once you have your first bike fit, you kind of opened your eyes to maybe more how it should feel.
Yeah.
And that kind of paves the way for the riding.
Yeah.
So.
Cool. But then getting foot pain a little bit later.
Yes.
So after initial fits, changing shoes.
Pedal systems, all that sort of thing.
Right. And that's kind of also led you to do some experimentation.
Yeah.
So like kind of figuring things out. You've got some knowledge. You can be dangerous. You can get your hands on, start moving things around. Is that kind of how you got into it?
Yeah, I think I'm not really someone who, when it comes to things like my own body and things like bike fit, who just likes to just sort of outsource the problem.
Yeah.
In the sense that I like to kind of understand and experiment with how it all works and how certain changes can affect how you feel on the bike. So.
Yeah. Okay. And can you give us an idea of kind of where you had got to then before you started coming in and kind of observing our sessions and seeing what happened then?
Yeah. I think I got to a point where I'd tried many different things.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about my own fit, I definitely tried many different things.
Yeah, there was a good moment this morning when you opened up your box of stuff, and there's a audible gasp from Matt.
There's a lot of paraphernalia in that box.
Yeah, which, I mean, for better or for worse, like, I've tried.
But if you don't try, you never know. And through experimentation, you can figure out a lot about what you don't want, which can get you closer to what you do want.
Yeah.
So it's having that first-hand experience and feeling things for yourself and coming to some of your own conclusions that can then start to point you in a different direction based on your testing and your experience.
Yeah, I think, understanding how changes actually feel is almost an art in itself. Just to have that sort of bodily awareness. It's, almost takes a bit of practice.
Yeah, oh, definitely. I think it's like any skill or any thing that requires feeling. You have to tune into it. You have to be aware of it. Just like, anything else in your body. If you don't use it, you lose it. And your brain, your body will prioritize whatever you feel is most important, where you put the work in, where you move, where you place emphasis. So, this is one of the things that we have to work with when we get new riders in quite a bit. You've never really thought about adopting a certain posture or being in a certain position or using a certain muscle group in the way that you have been. And so, there's a lot of education and just revealing what is possible. As you said, after your first bike fit, you were like, oh wow, yeah, my eyes are open now. I can see what is possible, but without knowing that, it's really difficult. As always, people usually get there if they experiment enough, but it just takes a lot longer to figure it out yourself, I think.
One of the interesting things, though, about your specific issue with your feet was obviously you filled in our questionnaire, which we get all of our riders to do beforehand, and it is vitally important because it gives us a lot of context, not only before we come face to face in the session, but there can be clues as to maybe what direction we might want to explore. And one of the things you said in your questionnaire was that your feet, as soon as you unclip and stand upright from the bike, the sensations come back into your toes and your feet. And that was a big giveaway as to maybe what direction we wanted to explore with your bike positioning and your kind of interaction with the bike. So having that kind of, you'd made that observation already. So that is a really useful thing from my perspective as a fitter. It gives me a clue as to, okay, right, this is obviously something that only happens when you're attached to your bike. You don't have that in quote unquote normal existence when you're upright like you're supposed to be. So that can then give us a clue as to maybe which way we want to go with exploring it, which was very, very useful nugget of information, which is why the questionnaire is so important.
I think that particular detail as well isn't necessarily something that you would think to add in.
No, it sounds completely trivial and almost irrelevant, but ends up being very relevant and very kind of useful.
Yeah.
So even the smallest detail, which you might think is trivial, can often lead to, a very kind of, insightful. It can open a door to a potential solution.
Yeah. We were just reading another questionnaire the other day, and on the questionnaire we ask both what your occupation is, but also what your most rewarding ride has been to date. And I find especially the last question, the most rewarding ride, is always a really good eye-opener. It really tells you so much about that person. And usually people really enjoy it because it comes right at the end of this questionnaire, which they've had to go all the way through, and then they get like a fun question at the end. But where people have ridden, what they value is always quite revealing.
Yeah. And it helps us get context about what is important to you with your bike.
Yeah.
So if your ideal ride is, riding to the tea hut, fantastic.
Yeah.
If it's going smashing alpine climbs, that's fantastic too. It just gives us an idea about what's important to you.
Yeah.
So it's entirely relevant and very important, in my opinion. So So we set the scene a little bit. We know what you were kind of dealing with, where the kind of the points of interest might be. And then, we sort of got you on the bike and, had a little look. And we found kind of one very interesting thing about your particular morphology in the fact that you have a very long torso relative to your leg length. Was that something you were aware of? Or
it's something I'd been told, or something that other people had observed about me in the past, but part of me sort of refused to believe it. But it was funny when you showed me the video, and it literally does look like you've just, like iPhone pinched, squeezed my legs to like zoom out so they look smaller. It was pretty striking.
Yeah.
But what was super interesting is when we were going through some questions about what you were feeling on the bike, you said that you wanted, you kind of like feel like you want to shift your hip backwards.
Yes.
And your hands almost go on top of the shifters.
Yeah.
So we kind of knew that you wanted to find some more length for your body somewhere. We didn't know where yet. But like the body tells you everything you need to know.
Self-selection.
Yeah, and you kind of figured this out already.
Yeah.
It just took a little bit of poking to.
But it's hard, I think, because especially when you're sort of getting into understanding bike fit, a lot of the time people are telling you to sort of shy away from being super stretched out or having that very long stem or what have you, or a very low bar height. And I think even though I knew really in the back of my mind that I needed to give myself more space on the bike, it still just feels wrong.
Yeah,
you know?
And your setup was pretty long in the first place. Like,
Yes.
yeah, what we've got a CAD 13 in a 56. You had a 120mm stem.
Yeah, 120 minus 10.
Yeah, and a 75mm reach bar. So it's not a short bike.
Yeah.
But again, needed potentially some extra space to allow your body to function as well as it can do in that context of riding the bike. So yeah, I mean, you kind of knew where we were going to go. You just maybe needed a bit of prodding and a bit of poking to
External validation.
Yeah, well, just a soundboard really, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I think that's a really important point. You know, everyone in, you know, as a human being, there's an innate part of you that just wants to be like everyone else, or the people around you, or the tribes that you're in, the other cyclists that you associate yourself with. And so there are certain cultural norms or orthodoxies. And so if you start to gravitate towards a slightly, air quotes, unorthodox position, then you start to question yourself. You're like, why is this? Am I different? Is this a bad thing? Is this not? Like, do I have a really long body? Do I want to have a really long body? and all of this is, you know, subconscious. But, you know, I think most people want to gravitate towards what is the kind of the norm. And so it becomes quite difficult to justify. As you were saying, you know, you almost didn't want to justify to yourself that actually I do need something longer and lower, and that's okay. You know, where do you find that validation?
Yeah.
And so, you know, part of coming in and talking to other people and talking to people who've seen a lot of different bodies on bikes and moving on bikes becomes an important thing to kind of validate what you're feeling and how you're operating. Am I going crazy, or am I actually going down the right path? And I think that's something that's not really talked about so much. There's a lot of value in that, especially for people who are interested in bike fit and interested in essentially getting their bodies to perform in the best way that they can. You know, you're out to ride your bike, you want to enjoy your bike as much as possible. So why not get your body working in the best way possible? Why ride scrunched up and in a bit more pain than you need to be? So yeah, it seems like you're going down that kind of journey of trying to figure stuff out. And I guess you get to a certain point, you always do get to a certain point where you kind of know which direction you want to go in, but you're not quite sure.
But there's all this noise as well of, like, you know, everything you read on the internet, or the majority of what quote unquote bike industry tells you, is that shorter and taller is comfortable and longer and lower is more aggro. So is that necessarily correct? Well, it depends entirely on the individual. But as with everything, we'd like to paint broad brushstrokes and talk in generalities.
Yeah, I mean, that's the industry creating those
exactly.
orthodoxies. You know, they want to create an orthodoxy around, well, endurance, and put that label on, and so it becomes easier then really to sell a bike because it's taller and shorter than the equivalent race bike.
Yeah.
And so theoretically, for most people, the orthodoxy, it should be more comfortable.
Interesting bit of context. What was your old bike?
Hey, Trek the money.
Oh.
The worst bike
For me.
for you.
But the worst bike for me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So because that bike is very tall and very short,
Yes.
for your body shape, probably not what you want to be riding. So, you know, move into the Cannondale, the CAD 13, which is longer and lower, probably more appropriate for your morphology. So this is why yeah, like we always preach about fit before you buy. If you're thinking about a new bike, find out what sort of shape of bike is going to suit you best. So yeah, like, you know, your move to the Cannondale was probably a good one. So
did you feel a big difference when you moved from one to the other, or how did you make that decision?
Yeah, I mean, I made the decision because it's sort of going back to what I said before. I think in the back of my mind, I knew that my body needed more space. And I mean, I probably just spent countless hours on Geometry Geeks trying to figure out what that looked like, you know, combined with budget and all the rest of it. So yeah, there was definitely an element of being interested in what my body needed. I think it just so happens for me that a lot of people, when they take this step up to the second or third road bike, they want maybe something quote unquote faster, racier, etc. And I guess in that sense, I was sort of fortunate that those things tied in. Whereas for a lot of people, it's everything that you've just said about my fit, but it's the inverse of that, where actually it's hard to maybe sometimes accept the fact that that's not what you need.
totally.
Yeah.
Have those conversations daily.
Yeah, literally had the opposite last night. Like, it was the opposite kind of fit, like super long legs, short torso, long arms. But he did actually, he did it the right way around and did the fit before you buy, and then figured out, oh, actually, I can buy this Pinarello in the right kind of geometry, and my stem is slammed, so it looks great.
Exactly.
But, you know, it's it just fits, and it's going to steer well, and it's going to have adjustment and all the rest of it. So yeah, geometries are just like another another kind of wormhole to go down. If you listen carefully, you might hear Ev just tinkering in the background. Say hi, Ev.
Trying really hard not to swear.
Break a bar out.
Yeah. So I guess for like additional context, what did we kind of find with your position when it kind of came in, Matt, where we were just initially looking at you? There was a few things that we kind of noticed. One was obviously the bike being a little bit short or shorter than it needed to be. What were the other things we found?
We ended up changing the crank length.
We did.
Not a huge change.
5mm change.
Enough to make it very annoying by Cannondale standards.
But what was interesting was you were on relatively quote unquote short cranks anyway. So we started on 165s, ended up on 160s, which was interesting. So saddle came down a bit. Yep.
Actually, handlebars, very interesting for me. Again, slightly confirmed the suspicion that I had, but still odd considering I'm a pretty slight individual to have to widen the handlebars.
Yeah, that was a big one. So we went from 38s to 40s. And it's something that we sort of talked a lot about is the relationship between shoulders and hips. Like we've talked about this a lot recently, haven't we? And that concept of kind of internal rotation being a more unstable position. Internal rotation of the shoulders forces it some potential internal rotation of the hips, which can create a lack of stability in the whole body. And one of the things that as well we found with you was that you were searching for stability through your feet. So actually widening your handlebars and giving you some kind of space in your chest, slightly externally rotating your shoulders a bit, really helped to getting your hips in the right place, helping with your kind of knee tracking as well. And you square on the saddle. Obviously the saddle had to be in the right place to allow you to do that, but yeah, really helped with kind of creating better alignment and more neutrality, as well as kind of putting your hands kind of more into the shifters. So one of the things we saw was you were kind of slipping off the end of the bar, and you were kind of like resting your thumbs on top of the shifters, like not kind of contacting them in a sort of a more optimal kind of way where you've got this pressure spread throughout the palm of your hand, which was quite an interesting one. So yeah, it seems to be a theme recently. I seem to be widening lots of people's handlebars, which is interesting. So that was a big change, going from a 38 to a 40. So not a mega change, but it had significant effect on how you moved, both visually and.
Did you feel it? Like, you feel it?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, there was definitely again an element of self-selection where I was essentially placing my hands where they wanted to be on the two narrow handlebars. And so, without even thinking, when they were widened by 2 centimeters, my hands were just in the normal place on the hoods, and I hadn't even thought about it. So, that was interesting.
Yeah. So bike changes were essentially, like we said, shorter cranks, slightly wider bars, lower front end, longer front end, lower saddle position, slightly more rearward saddle position. We did change the saddle as well, but it's quite a similar saddle, just slightly less of an extreme curve to the shape of it, so from front to back. So we were on a Bontrager Aeolus Comp 145, and we went to a Pro Stealth curved 142, so which just has a slightly more shallow bucket kind of shape, which seemed to work quite well. It's very similar but slightly different.
Yeah, those changes seem to make sense in terms of making the bike longer to accommodate a longer torso, but because you've got a decent amount of mobility and strength, then you can get your body into that kind of posture, lowering the saddle, lowering the handlebars. That probably closes up the hip a little bit more at the top of the pedal stroke if everything's coming down, so then shortening the crank gives a little bit more room to that hip, so you can still pedal smoothly, create good power, feel stable, and yeah.
The main fun came at your feet, didn't it?
Oh yeah, we haven't even got to feet.
My goodness.
What happened there?
My messed up feet, yeah.
Well, you were playing around with you've been playing around with shoes quite a bit lately, haven't you?
Yeah, I've definitely been through a fair few pairs. There's been lots of eBay deals done.
Yeah, shoes are tricky, aren't they? It's really hard to, figure out what works for you unless you try stuff on. So,
yeah, absolutely. I think width has been a huge thing for me. Although, as Matt pointed out, it's maybe if I worked on my feet a bit more, width may be less of a problem, just to do with how the width of my feet change when they're loaded. Maybe not.
Well, what was interesting, or what you found interesting, made an interesting point, Way, was when we looked at, so a few weeks ago when you were in, Matt, we did a scan of your feet, a 3D scan, using the Law hardware, software.
Yeah.
So luckily we had a 3D image of your foot at various degrees of ankle dorsiflexion. Now, one of the kind of interesting things we found out with you was that you have epic range of ankle dorsiflexion, but relatively little plantar flexion compared to your range of dorsiflexion, which is usually the other way around.
Yeah.
People a lot of the time find it way easier to plantar flex their ankles rather than kind of dorsiflex. So what we kind of found was looking at this scan as well as watching you move and kind of you giving us feedback about what your feet are doing and your historic posterior tibialis injury, discomfort, pain, all the above, which you probably feel more when you're running than on the bike, is that you have a relatively low or pronated medial arch, which puts quite a bit of stress on that post tib, and we saw that. Way did a bit of digging while we were yapping, and we could see that in the scan. So as you load your foot, there was that kind of inward rotation, that kind of like collapsing of that medial arch, which was putting stress on that kind of like post tib, and maybe some of your Achilles as well. And your kind of like range of dorsiflexion being so good, you were kind of like really dropping your heels when you were pedaling, just trying to find that stability. And like you mentioned there was no contact, you couldn't feel the heel in the shoe, and it was all going through that kind of was that big toe, that you were saying?
Yeah, or
Yeah.
just generally like the toes and the balls of my feet.
Yeah, like across your metatarsals.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So that was kind of
riding around on your tiptoes.
yeah,
Yeah.
basically like riding around on your
Pretty
tiptoes.
much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things we kind of like honed in on was, okay, maybe this isn't a shoe thing, because your bonds fit pretty well.
Yep.
Like, width wise, you're not kind of like, you're kind of not right up against the edge. There's contact, but there's not kind of like a spilling over. Length were pretty good. Maybe we could do with a little bit of a lower volume upper, but to be confirmed after some testing. You'd already done your G8s, so we'd already got arch support in there. You'd already experimented with that. So the main kind of concern was getting you more stable through that heel and kind of making sure that your foot has that reference and that proprioception of where it is in space inside the shoe, so that you can find that stability and not go kind of searching for it with that epic range of mobility that you've got through your ankle. So what we ended up doing, like going through the kind of the process, was we put when you compress it was a bit of foam, but it's about 4 millimeters, like a shim underneath, like shimmed your heel. So like just raising it, so giving the shoe effectively a drop, as if you want to think about it as running shoes. That felt better on your right foot than it didn't really touch the sides on your left foot. So then we tried wedging on top of the heel lift, and we started with one varus wedge in the right foot, which felt pretty good. You thought, all right, I can start to feel some connection here, and we could see a visual change in your kind of mechanics, everything kind of coming into a bit more of a nice alignment. But the left one still didn't really touch the sides. We ended up with 3
Really?
in the left foot. Yeah. And that's where it started to feel a bit more even.
Nice.
But then you had a theory of you maybe started wanting a bit more arch support.
Yeah.
Which is kind of mad because Matt's got quite low medial arches. So we ended up like with a level 4 arch support on the G8, and then it was like, okay, right, I can feel more of the shoe now. I can feel like I can spread the load across the shoe. And it was that change that actually shifted you into the center of the saddle, because you could start to load your left foot a bit more, create more stability through that side, and the body was like, okay, yeah, I can load this a bit more now. I can because you were previously leaning into that kind of right leg a bit more, that right side. And once we kind of got your left foot happier and telling your brain where it is in space, it just kind of shifted a bit more into the center of the saddle, loading that left leg a bit more. The pedal stroke didn't sound as choppy, and it was okay. Yeah, can start to push a bit. So really interestingly, I mean, we moved your cleats back maybe like 3 mil as well. So you have quite a rearward cleat position. We're about 30 mil behind your first met head, measured it, so which is quite a lot.
Yeah.
But because you've got that epic range of motion, we put your cleats too far forward, then we're going to lose some of that connection and that contact through that heel, because your body's going to go searching for it. So rearward cleat position for you is actually going to be really good. Well, subject to testing, but the theory is that it should provide you with that contact and that kind of sensation, that proprioception of where effectively the ground is, even though you're levitating on your metal object through space. So a lot of kind of like, sort of work inside the shoe in terms of getting your body happier with where it is in space and increasing your proprioception of what is effectively your floor and where the ground is inside the shoe. I think with some kind of specific muscle activation through your kind of glutes and your hamstrings, your posterior chain in particular, I think will, or should theoretically, really help you kind of stabilize yourself on the bike, calm down some of that stuff that you're feeling in your kind of post-hip Achilles and that kind of thing, and just get you a little bit more connected and fluid and stable on the bike. So that was kind of where the fun was, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it was definitely a process.
Sorry, rabbiting on here, but yeah, it was emotional, wasn't it?
Yeah, but it's
One way of putting it, yeah.
But it's complicated, and this is why bike fitting takes time. because you have to experiment. And I think that's something you picked up on, so Matt, just the ability to compare different positions and test out and confirm. So how did you find that process? Just going through multiple iterations of different things. Like, did you get tired at some point?
Oh, I got tired. I was sweaty.
We both needed lunch by the end of it, didn't we?
Yeah.
We were both pretty hungry.
But yeah, I think experimenting is something you can do, by yourself to a point. But at the end of the day, I mean, aside from it just being much quicker, to have someone to sort of bounce those ideas off and to just generally provide an external eye, I think that it would be a lot harder.
Yeah.
Without.
When we were in the cafe and we were talking, you were saying about how taking it to the extreme really helps to frame it.
Yes.
So we did the vast majority of the fitting on the rig, and we kind of go to the extreme in terms of each kind of variable on the bike. So we started where the saddle's obviously too low, take it to where it's too high, and it's kind of like bike fitting is like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. You don't know what the just right porridge is until you've tasted the cold porridge and the hot porridge. And it's the same thing, bear with me. It's the same thing with bike fit, isn't it?
Yeah.
You don't know what you don't know, and until you have a frame of reference, then you're just guessing. So if you haven't experienced what too long is, which until this point you hadn't, then you've got no frame of reference to kind of come back from. That's a kind of, in my mind, the only real way that you can start to hone in on where you need to be, or what kind of postcode you need to be in, is to take it to the extreme and then figure out what you don't want in order to hone in more on what you do want. And like you were saying, it's really easy to do that on an adjustable rig, like really quickly, but you can do it with patience, diligence, and kind of time on your own bike, in your own kind of setup.
Yeah, you just have to be very systematic about it.
Yeah.
And go through that testing process in a diligent kind of way. Whereas most of us just want to throw some stuff on,
that would
roughly guess it.
Yeah.
And see
that
how
would be
it goes.
my number one tip to anyone else doing at-home bike fit experimentation, is to just write it down. Just write it down, because you'll end up trying stuff without realizing you've tried it before, and just have no frame of reference. And
What's the definition of insanity, isn't it? Trying to say it twice and expecting a different result. But you made that very good point of that. Taking it to the extreme and then coming back is a really useful experiment and useful methodology, as long as you're keeping an eye on trends and writing your observations down.
So what's the next steps, lads?
So next steps are to eventually get these shorter cranks on. It's been emotional, hasn't it, Ev?
He's not talking.
He's not talking. He's not talking to me. So we need to get the 160mm cranks on, then we can make that final adjustment to the saddle position. Front end's all done, so we've actually gone shorter on the stem, but longer on the handlebars.
Handlebar reach, people.
If you that is the thing. You don't know, educate yourself.
We should do a podcast on that.
Yeah,
just on that.
Just
handlebar
on that.
reach.
Yeah. So we've gone, slightly short on the stem, way longer on the handlebar reach. Drop the front end down quite a lot as well. The final part will be on the bike anyway, to get the cranks on and then redo the saddle position to test. And then the next thing is to test the shoes that we've modified with the wedging and the shims and the modified arch support, cleat position, see how that goes, see what trends you kind of notice. And then there's some body homework, which you don't know what that is yet, but I'm going to say it is. But effectively, it's going to be to increase the kind of capacity and stability through your feet, so you can create that stable platform on the pedals, in the shoes, and not rely on the bike solely to create that stability for you. So making sure that your feet are working as well as they can, and working towards that. For those of you that do have kind of foot issues and stuff, go and just type into Google Gary Ward, and everything will become clear.
He's actually got a really fantastic course on foot activation, and I think it's called Wake Up
Your Feet.
Yeah,
it's 25 quid.
Yeah.
You buy the wedges for another 25 quid. You get access to it for lifetime. I did this over Christmas and it was brilliant.
Yeah.
So that's going to be like a big thing, getting the feet active.
Not just for cycling, though.
No,
it's a
for
whole
just general functionality.
Yeah.
And then glute medius, controlling that hip, especially on that right side.
Yeah.
And then some stuff on your hamstrings as well, and some hip extension movements as well, which will also help your running. So things like glute bridges, hip thrusters, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, because you're a big runner too, aren't you?
Yeah. I mean, well, I don't know if big's the right word, but yeah, it's been interesting as well noticing the patterns and the trends between what I've learned today about my body on the bike and off the bike, and how that relates to running and general life.
Yeah, does it correlate?
Yeah, I think I mean, I think it does. It's basically just what you've just been describing about the things I need to work on, and I've always felt that there's been missing links in terms of like hips and other functionality whilst running, just as there have been on the bike. So definitely, yeah, it all adds up.
Yeah.
And then we'll see where we go from there, basically.
Yeah, so this is really just the beginning, isn't it?
Yeah.
A bike fit is just the beginning.
Yeah.
It's a beginning of a process. So you're clearly going away in a better position with some good changes, but we need to test it to see how good it really is. Like, how sustainable is it? How well does your body adapt? Does your body accept it? And you need to give us some feedback and come back in at some point in the future once you've had enough mileage in the new position and you've gotten some good feedback of the position on short rides, long rides, more intense rides, easier rides, just so you get a really good idea of what your body is experiencing in the new position. Are things trending in the right direction? Are they not? And then we can make further adjustments. So yeah, I think you were, when you first came in today, you were really thinking about different shoes.
Yeah.
But we've ended up in a place where actually maybe your current shoes are okay, or they're good enough. And so we wanted to try it out and see how good they can be before getting into like another set of parameters or variables, things like that.
Yeah. To be continued.
Yeah, we'll have to.
I reckon.
Give it a couple of weeks of riding.
Yeah.
And then tune in for the next one. Matt comes back and tells us everything's fallen apart. Yeah. Oh, it'll be really interesting just to follow the journey and see what happens. So I know we're going into winter, autumn now, but still riding outside?
Well, I'm going to have to now, aren't I? No excuses.
Well, we'll see what happens. But also a good opportunity to do all that off-bike work if you're not riding outside too. So there's always an opportunity, people, whether you're riding outdoors, indoors, not doing so much riding, doing more off-bike work. There's always places and areas where you can be making good and improving your bike riding without doing more riding. So yeah. Anyway, thanks for sharing your story, Matt, and to be continued. Thanks for all your thoughts and actually doing the bike fitting, Matt.
No worries.
And catch you on the next one. See you later. If you made it to the end of this episode, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed what you heard, do leave us a rating or review, as this really helps other riders find our podcast too, and motivates us to keep making more episodes. Thanks for your support, and catch you on the next one.
Suffering from numb hands, tingling toes, and any other persistent discomforts when you ride? These are all signs that your bike fit could be improved. If you're bike fit curious, get in touch with Wei or Matt by emailing info@foundation.fit or finding them on Instagram @FDN_bikefit. Finally, for all your bike servicing needs, custom dream bike or hand-built wheels, go to www.frequencycycleworks.com or find me on Instagram @frequencycycleworks. Until next time, keep on spinning.